Okay, Jeff. So in last week's The Other Mac, which is getting a lot of attention online, you were chatting about how AI was used to create a summer reading list where two-thirds of the books didn't exist. It looks like that has quickly been followed up with another news story about AI hallucinations. But this one I think has more consequences because it is all about hallucinations in the U.S. Health and Human Services report. Secretary Robert F. Kennedy had issued this report, which is called Make America Healthy Again, and a bunch of problems when it comes to AI generated content.
Yeah, so a group called Notice, Notus, reported last week that at least 7 of the studies cited in the Make America Healthy Again report didn't exist at all, and that some of the legitimate studies had their results misinterpreted to better align with RFK's report goals. All of that on top of some very common AI errors like broken links, incorrect author names, and things like that. What's more is that when asked, the White House press secretary would not directly answer the question of whether AI was used to make this report, instead, mysteriously blaming the mistakes on formatting issues, insisting, of course, that this is, I quote, one of the most transformative health reports that has ever been released by the federal government. So another case of the Trump administration saying it's doing the best things ever in the face of being caught doing some of the worst things ever.
This response, in terms of trying to defend AI hallucinations, feels a little bit like the dog ate my homework, but instead blaming things on formatting issues. I'd like to know how that goes for all the students who are using AI to fake their way through schools. It is super worrying to see a report like this that is calling for increased scrutiny of childhood vaccines. This is an issue, of course, that RFK has spent decades trying and failing, thankfully, to prosecute. Moving forward in the U.S. with such clear markers that it was generated by artificial intelligence, especially since the White House is looking for a $500 million increase in funding to implement the recommendations that are coming out of this report that has those hallucinations within.
Yeah, so maybe they'll address some of these things in the meantime, but it's pretty shaky foundations to build your report recommendations on when you've got AI writing a report that is quoting studies that don't exist and things like that. And it's not it's not the only technology leveraged attack on healthcare on the state side. 404 Media recently reported that a sheriff's office in Texas searched through 83,000 license plate reader cameras, many of them in other states, to track down a woman who they suspected of having an abortion, which is mostly banned in the states. But it isn't banned in those other states whose cameras were searched, and it just seems like a crazy way to enforce a law in your own state by surveilling people in other states. It's just very disconcerting.
It is super disconcerting and just makes you question the reach of law enforcement mass surveillance these days. And the fact that there are so many issues that have come out like this. I do want to mention, Jeff, that I was reading the article that you're referring to, and it actually has the search report of those license plate scans. And the reason that they scan license plates, this is what the police officer inputted, was had an abortion, search for female. I mean, they're not even sort of hiding the fact that they are going after women who've had abortions in that state. Now, it is pretty much, we should say, illegal to have an abortion in the state of Texas. So this puts women in a really difficult situation in terms of not having access to reproductive care. What's even more disturbing, I think, is that police don't even need any type of warrant to do searches like this.
Yeah, and it's if you've got all of this surveillance state that's been growing and growing, we're going to have AI looking through cameras we set up everywhere, reporting hallucinations to police cops around the state or the country or whatever. It's really setting up to be a pretty, I don't know, the mass surveillance stuff is not really in the right hands for people who can be responsible with it. I know that they can do some good, but I think we're seeing risks, and I don't think these kind of concerns are going to diminish when we have things like next story increasing rumors that Meta is going to be part of a collaboration with a defense tech company to build VR, AR helmets and other wearables with AI integration for the US Army. So that gets even scarier.
It does get even scarier, especially when you have big tech companies like Meta who are being potentially granted contracts. And we know that Meta has such a questionable history in terms of how they manage things like privacy. So I really don't
Yes.
understand how it gets to that point where there seems to be no repercussions for some of these big companies. We do want to mention as well that when it comes to big tech companies who are engaged in defense contracts, that's certainly not something that is new. Many of the big tech companies do engage in these defense contracts, especially in the US. What's also interesting, though, is that how some of these companies are managing their AI ethics or principles documents that prohibit the use of AI for things that are likely to cause harm. So you have a great example here from another big tech company that is sort of, I think it's fair to say, flirting with these contracts and not sure where they stand on that harm issue.
Yeah, and I think for Google to be, do you remember when Google's thing was do no evil? Well, we've come an awful long way from do no evil to let's remove the quote that says we shouldn't do things likely to cause harm with the AI so we can probably get defense contracts. And keep in mind, this is the same Google whose AI overview tool in its search has been in headlines recently for being unable to even reliably tell what year it is currently. So responses to the question, is it 2025, were answered by Google's AI saying, I quote, no, it's not 2025. The current year is 2025. So I just don't know where these things are going. I believe Google's now addressed that issue, but these are the kind of things that make me so wary about using AI and tech and putting it in the hands of people who are not really demonstrating that they're going to use it responsibly. And all of this stuff's being trained on us. So it's weird to think as a consumer, whether you're using your Oculus Rift headset or something, that they're leveraging what they learn from you to build weapons and things like, maybe not directly weapons, but things that are going to be used in the army. It's really not what any of us signed up for, I don't think.
Just a note too on AI overviews. I was listening to a podcast recently from Hard Fork, and it's one of my favorite podcasts. And they were at a recent Google event, and they broke down some of the announcements from that event. Now, you and I have covered that on this show, but I do want to say that they were saying a lot of people are very confused about how sort of AI search is showing up in their lives because you have these AI overviews that you didn't ask for at the top of your Google searches, but you can also use AI's assistant Gemini to search as well. So there's all these different ways that I think people's search experience is being reshaped by AI. So I just wanted to mention that in case people weren't familiar with what the idea of an AI overview was at the top of your search. And just a shout out to Jeff, because you have a segment that you've done in the past on AI search.
Yeah, and why it sucks.
Yeah, that people can check out as well. So in other news, in terms of tech companies that are doing things well, Apple just reported in its App Store Transparency Report that of the 7.7 million app submissions they reviewed in 2024, 1.9 million were rejected because they didn't meet the standards of the App Store, including those linked to spam and fraud.
Yeah, this is great to see. That's almost a quarter of the apps that were submitted that are being refused by Apple. And even for appeals, the success rate of those apps that were denied, the success rate upon appeal was only 1.6%. So it really seems like Apple's taking this stuff seriously. And I think, it demonstrates that there's value to Apple running its own app store to enforce standards that protect its customers. And I know the EU has pushed back against things like that, but from where I'm standing, I would be much more comfortable downloading an app from the Apple App Store than I would be putting an app on my Android phone. And there's a reason for it, because Apple has taken responsibility for the App Store. You can argue that they're doing it so that they make some money off that, but I honestly think part of the Apple experience of it just works and that kind of stuff from that they've been saying for years, part of that is the safety of its users. So part of the reason why people buy Apple products is to have an experience that they don't have to worry as much about. So I think the App Store report is just great to see that that they really are keeping their eyes on the door.
Yeah, and I think, generally speaking, maybe we could talk about this on a future episode. I think it's worth noting too, like, in my opinion, covering this space and working with some of these companies over the years, that it is that, I think Apple and Google, generally speaking, try to do the right thing. And there are missteps along the way. I think Apple's gotten the privacy stuff right really forever, but certainly they've had other issues. Meta, to me, like, lives in another category where they never seem to take responsibility for anything they do, and they're really slow to actually change. And so I just mentioned that because I think there's sort of a hierarchy in terms of the evilness of
I totally agree.
some of these tech companies, and Meta just keeps faltering. In other good news, at least if you are a Swiftie, Taylor Swift has regained ownership of her music masters, so you can now stream the original releases guilt-free instead of having to restrict yourself to Swift's Taylor version re-recordings. This is very inside baseball, Jeff, but I don't know if you're a Swiftie or not.
I imagine there's a lot of people who are excited about it. I'm not a Taylor Swift fan by any means, although I totally respect her. But I've always been impressed by how she handled, in the initial case, Scooter Braun buying her masters out from under her nose. So she re-recorded all those albums, which is and then put them on the streaming services. Well, that's one thing, but to have the power over your audience, the connection with your fans, that you can actually get them to stop listening to the original recordings to listen to your new Taylor's version recordings, that's just very impressive. So it's great that everything's worked out, and I'm pretty sure people are going to appreciate hearing the original Taylor Swift versions. And you're hearing her with a younger voice, you're hearing how it was originally done. I'm sure people will be very happy to go back to that. So glad that has all come together.
Absolutely. A whole generation was recently celebrating Taylor Swift Independence Day, as they called it, on a recent Saturday. So I know it's a big deal. Now, let's make that move from music to movies and TV, Jeff, because you're going to talk about why there's a limit on how useful higher resolutions are as TVs make their way from 4K to 8K and what that all means.